The cold of morning clawed deep into Colt Marston's bones as he dug alone into the hard-packed earth with bare hands. The canyon walls stood silent and indifferent, jagged sentinels to his grief. The shovel had broken hours earlier, snapped against the unyielding ground. His fingers bled as he scooped dirt one handful at a time. The grave was shallow, a poor resting place for the woman he had loved too late. White Dove lay wrapped in her deerskin robe, peaceful now, free of the pain the living carried. Colt sat back, breath ragged, staring at the small pile of stones that marked her final place. The locket, now worn and dull, lay atop the cairn. He did not speak. The wind whispered for him. When he stood, every movement felt heavier, as if the weight of the world had settled onto his shoulders. He gathered his hat and rifle, slung them over his back, and walked. There was nowhere to go, but the trail stretched on, unforgiving and eternal. Hours bled into miles. The sun beat down, merciless and uncaring. Somewhere behind him, Red Elk had vanished into the wild. Colt did not look back. As Pine Bluff came into view, a distant haze under the bruised sky, the town looked smaller, meaner than before. The proud banners that had once flown outside Judge Voss's mansion now lay torn and forgotten. The gates stood open like the mouth of a dead animal. Colt passed under them without slowing. Inside, silence greeted him. The judge's hired men had scattered like rats from a burning ship. Clara Voss sat alone on the veranda, dressed in black silk, staring blankly at the empty horizon with a glass of untouched whiskey in her hand. Her once glorious curls hung limp. The air smelled faintly of burnt wood and betrayal. Colt approached, boots crunching over scattered glass and debris. Clara barely turned her head. "You killed him." Her voice was flat, hollow. "He deserved it." She laughed bitterly, the sound dry and sharp. "And what did it fix? Do you think you're free now?" She lifted the glass and stared into it like she expected answers. "You were a fool to think you could have both worlds, Colt. You never belonged here." He said nothing. The truth in her words cut deeper than any bullet. He took off his hat, held it at his side. "I came to say goodbye." "To me?" Her voice rose in sharp disbelief. "No." His eyes darkened. "To what I thought I was." He turned and walked down the steps, never glancing back. Clara watched him go, her expression unreadable, as the man who had once given her everything left with nothing. The sheriff found him later at the edge of town, leaning against the corral fence watching the sunset behind the distant hills. Sheriff McLean lit a cigarette, his lined face thoughtful. "Voss's men are gone. Railroad pulled out. The town might actually survive." Colt didn't respond. McLean inhaled deeply, then exhaled smoke in a slow stream. "You heading out?" "I ain't staying." The sheriff nodded. "Didn't figure you would." They stood in companionable silence, watching as the sky shifted from fire to velvet. Finally, McLean tossed the spent cigarette into the dust. "You'll be remembered, Colt. Might not be kindly, but you'll be remembered." "I didn't come here for a legacy." McLean gave a dry chuckle. "Most don't." With that, Colt slung his rifle and stepped into the darkening trail. The town behind him faded into obscurity. The land ahead was vast, wild, and indifferent. He welcomed it. Days passed. The plains stretched endless under indifferent stars. Rain came in sheets and cold winds tore at him, yet he pressed on. At a lonely river crossing, he stopped. The current whispered against the rocks. He knelt, stared into the shifting water, and let the silver locket slip from his fingers. It spun and vanished downstream. He rose and continued. Far into the Badlands, where even the maps failed and the land belonged only to the wind and the creatures who called it home, Colt rode alone. His figure, small against the brutal canvas of desert and mountain, disappeared slowly into the horizon. The prairie kept his secret. The land moved on. There were no songs for Colt Marston, no plaques or monuments. Only the legend that somewhere out there, a lone rider wandered the emptiness, seeking something he could never reclaim. And the wind whispered the name of the woman, who had been lost long before the first shot had ever been fired. White Dove. The saloon doors creaked on rusty hinges as Colt Marston stepped inside, heavy boots sending dust curling over the warped floorboards. The low murmur of voices died instantly. Every set of eyes followed him as he crossed to the bar. His hand trembled slightly as he tapped the rim of an empty glass. The barkeep filled it without asking. Colt downed the whiskey in one hard swallow, slammed the glass down, and turned to face the room. His voice cut the silence like a blade. "Where's Voss?" No answer. Only the lazy squeak of the overhead fan and the muffled jingle of spurs as a pair of hired guns stood from their table. In the corner, they wore black dusters and cold smirks, pistols hanging low and loose on their hips. One tilted his hat back, revealing pale, dead eyes. "You got business with the judge, Marston?" The taller of the two drawled. Colt stepped forward slowly, his hand never drifting far from the worn grip of his revolver. "Yeah, I aim to collect." The taller man chuckled low, exchanged a look with his partner. "I reckon you won't get far." Colt smiled grim and bitter. "I reckon we'll see." The air tightened like a noose. In a blur of movement, Colt's gun cleared leather, a thunder crack split the heavy air, and the taller gunman dropped hard. Onto the floorboards, his pistol clattering useless beside him. The second man flinched, eyes wide, and Colt was on him before he could draw, slamming a hard fist across his jaw. The man crumpled to the ground, moaning. Colt stood over him, breathing hard. "I'll ask again. Where's Voss?" From the doorway, a low, gravelly voice answered. "He's where he's always been, boy. Sitting high while you wallow low." Sheriff McLean, hat tilted low over tired eyes, walked forward, boots loud in the dead quiet. "You think a bullet'll fix this?" he asked, voice low and weary. Colt wiped blood from his knuckles. "Maybe not, but it's all I got left." McLean sighed, stepped aside. "Judge is at the big house. You won't make it past his men." Colt holstered his gun. "Watch me." Outside the saloon, the wind screamed across the empty streets. Colt mounted his horse and rode hard toward the sprawling Voss estate. The house stood like a fortress, all sharp lines and cold lights against the dying sun. Shadows moved along. The rooftop and the wide verandas, armed men waiting. Colt tied off in the shadows and crept through the back fields, rifle tight against his side. The scent of wild sage and gun oil filled the air. As he crossed the dark yard, a figure melted from the trees behind him. Red Elk. Colt spun, rifle raised. Red Elk stood unmoved, arms folded, eyes flashing in the moonlight. "You'll die here." "I didn't come for mercy." Red Elk nodded once. "Then I will help, for her." Together they moved like ghosts through the tangled brush. A sentry shifted on the ridge. 2 shots whispered in the dark, and he slumped silently into the grass. They pressed on. The back kitchen door gave way under Colt's boot. Inside, the house felt wrong. Too grand, too polished, its walls lined with expensive paintings and mounted heads of animals brought from distant lands. The trophies of a man who took whatever pleased him. Footsteps echoed ahead. Red Elk melted into the shadows. Colt pushed forward, gun raised. At the grand staircase, 4 men blocked his way. Colt stepped into the open and fired. The crack of gunfire split the night. Wood splintered, glass shattered. 2 men fell. The others scrambled for cover, returning wild shots that tore through plaster and paintings. Colt rolled behind a thick pillar, heart hammering in his chest. Red. Elk struck from behind, silent and lethal. One man crumpled with a choked gasp. Colt burst from cover and finished the last with a cold, precise shot. The mansion fell silent again. They ascended the stairs. At the top stood Judge Elias Voss, calm as stone, draped in a silk robe with a glass of brandy in hand. Clara stood behind him, pale, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. "So," Voss drawled, swirling the brandy, "the prodigal comes home. You've made quite a mess." Colt leveled the gun at his chest. "This ends tonight." Voss chuckled, darkly, utterly unafraid. "You think killing me will bring her back? You'll still be nothing, boy. A stray dog scratching at doors that will never open." Colt's hand tightened on the grip. His voice came low, deadly. "I was nothing the day I walked away from her." Behind him, Red Elk watched silently, expression unreadable. Voss set down his glass slowly. "If you shoot me, my men will bury you out back before dawn." Colt took a step forward. "I'm already dead." The shot rang out like thunder. Judge Voss staggered back, clutching his chest as crimson spread across the silk. He slumped into the high-backed chair behind him, lifeless eyes still open, staring in disbelief. Clara screamed, fled down the hallway into the dark. Colt stood over the body, chest heaving. The gun smoked faintly in his hand. Red Elk laid a heavy hand on Colt's shoulder. "It's done." Colt nodded, hollow. "Not yet." They fled the burning house as shouts erupted behind them. Red Elk led Colt through hidden trails back into the wilderness. They found White Dove at dawn in a secluded canyon where pale morning light spilled over the rocks like gold. She lay weak, fevered, a cruel wound staining her dress dark. Red Elk knelt beside her, silent. Colt fell to his knees, gathering her gently. Her eyes fluttered open. Recognition dawned, soft and sorrowful. "I came back," Colt whispered. Her fingers brushed his cheek faintly, her voice barely a breath. Too late. Her hand slipped from his face. She was gone. Colt stared into the empty distance, his heart breaking as the canyon winds carried her spirit away. Red Elk rose without a word and disappeared into the morning. Shadows. Colt sat alone, holding the cold form of the woman he had once betrayed, realizing that no gunfight, no vengeance, could ever restore what he had lost. The ranch had grown larger than Colt Marston ever dreamed. Wide open pastures rolled out for miles under skies so wide they threatened to swallow a man whole. The Marston brand was burned into the flesh of over 200 head of cattle. Colt had the land, the wealth, the respect, or so the townsfolk claimed. Yet each night he rode the fences long after the sun had bled into the soil, restless, staring out toward the dark line where earth met sky. His heart, once full of fierce ambition, now felt like a hollowed-out husk rattling in the cold wind. Clara, draped in silks and lace, ruled over the grand ranch house like a queen whose crown had been bought with blood. She filled the parlor with Eastern furniture, loud parties, and sharper whispers. Colt rarely stayed long indoors. He preferred the saddle, the barns, the company of animals who never judged. "You've built an empire, my dear," Clara said, once swirling wine in a delicate glass as she gazed into the gilded mirror. "Everything you ever wanted." He gave no answer. His fingers traced absent patterns on the window pane as a distant smoke column rose on the horizon. His gaze hardened. That was Shoshone land. Days later, the news rode fast into Pine Bluff. Village burned to the ground, women and children left to the mercy of winter winds. Few survived. The local papers spun tales of lawless renegades, but Colt knew better. His stomach twisted into knots. At dusk, Colt rode out alone. Hooves kicked up dry clouds that swallowed him whole. As the prairie stretched thin, he came upon the scorched remains of a once peaceful camp. Charred wood, blackened earth, the smell of ruin and sorrow. Here and there, feathers caught in the wind, whispering accusations. Blood stained the soil where children had played. Then movement. Red Elk emerged from behind the jagged remnants of a council lodge. His presence was like a blade drawn in silence. Colt slid off his horse, boots sinking into the soft ash. They stood, neither willing to speak first. Red Elk's eyes burned cold fire under the pale moon. "I came to help," Colt said finally, voice low, throat dry. "You?" Red Elk spat, stepping closer until Colt could see the dried blood splattered across his chest. "You made this possible." Colt shook his head, fists clenched. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," Red Elk snarled. "Judge Voss wants this land for his railroad. Your bride and her father sent men. They wore masks and carried torches. They slaughtered my people because they stood in the way." Colt staggered back a step, the words a punch to the gut he didn't see coming. "White Dove escaped," Red Elk said, bitter. "Barely. She walks now with the wounded spirit of the deer. She won't speak your name." The wind screamed through the ruins like the cries of the dead. Colt bowed his head. "Tell me where." Red Elk sneered. "You think to ride in like the white savior? She doesn't want you. I'll protect her. You couldn't protect her before." Red Elk stepped close, jabbing a rough finger into Colt's chest. "If you ride near again, I'll kill you myself." The two men stared, frozen, in hatred and regret. Then Red Elk turned his back and melted into the shadows like a wolf, vanishing into the brush. Colt stood motionless, breathing raggedly. He looked down at his boots caked with ash and blood. The prairie whispered all around him, accusing, relentless. When Colt returned to Pine Bluff, he found Clara waiting at the ranch gates. She stood draped in her finest ivory gown, arms crossed, lips tight. "You went out there, didn't you?" His silence answered her. "Stay out of it," she hissed. "This is business. The railroad means prosperity, safety. You're a rancher now. That Indian woman is nothing. You owe me." Colt's jaw clenched, tight. He swung down from his horse, tossing the reins carelessly. "I owe her more." Clara's laughter rang brittle and sharp across the yard. "You're a fool." The next days brought no peace. At the saloon, whispers followed him. Men averted their gazes or smirked behind dirty glasses. Rumors said the judge had ordered the burning to clear out the last Shoshone band. No one dared speak the truth aloud. Sheriff McLean found Colt at dawn fixing a broken fence line. "Hard ride last night?" Colt nodded, sweat already soaking through his shirt. "Words you've been asking questions about the attack." "I have." "Best let it be." McLean lit his cigarette with shaky fingers. "Judge Voss owns half this town and most of the law. Ain't nothing but trouble down that road." "I know." McLean sighed, long and heavy. "Boy, you're walking straight into a storm." Colt stared toward the distant ridge where the sun spilled weak gold light over the land. "Maybe I deserve it." McLean nodded grimly. "Maybe you do." That night, unable to stand the walls of the house, Colt rode under the stars. The wind cut like knives. He reached into his coat and pulled the silver locket from around his neck. Hands shaking, he opened it for the first time since the day of the church betrayal. Inside lay the faded drawing of a single white dove feather. His throat tightened. "I'm coming," he whispered to the cold emptiness. The locket clicked shut. The prairie stayed silent. The wind tore across the desolate Wyoming plains as the sun bled out behind the jagged ridges. Colt Marston sat alone in the saddle, hat low, coat whipping like a black flag of surrender. His horse shifted nervously under him at the edge of the ridge. Below, the town of Pine Bluff sprawled like a rattlesnake in the dust, silent and waiting. Colt's eyes were hard as sun-baked stone, yet deep inside them flickered something broken and buried. He touched the silver locket around his neck, a keepsake he hadn't dared open in months. The church bell rang hollow across the valley, calling the town to witness what was about to happen. Colt nudged his horse forward and rode slow into town. As he passed, shopkeepers froze mid-sweep, and ranch hands paused with bridles in hand. The whisper came in ripples. "Marston, he's back." "No," one waved, no one smiled. At the whitewashed chapel steps, two women waited. One in a modest deerskin dress, long raven hair falling loose down her back, her proud brown face calm yet unreadable. The other in a bright silk gown that glared against the sun, golden curls piled atop her head like a crown, green eyes sharp as knives. White Dove and Clara Voss, Colt dismounted without a word. His boot struck hard against the dry ground as he stepped between them and toward the preacher. Every breath he took felt heavier than the mountains looming in the distance. The preacher cleared his throat nervously. "Do you come to pledge your vow, Colt Marston?" The silence dragged. Colt's gaze flicked from one woman to the other. White Dove stood straight, shoulders back, her gaze locked on him with painful hope. Clara tilted her chin arrogantly, already confident of victory. The townsfolk crowded close. You could feel them holding their breath. A drover whispered behind, cupped hands. "He won't marry the savage." Another man spat into the dirt and muttered, "Fool boys fixin' to throw it all away." Colt inhaled sharply and turned, not to White Dove, but to Clara. He reached out and took Clara's soft manicured hand. "I choose Clara Voss," he said loudly, as if speaking to the land itself. "We will be wed." A ripple of gasps circled the crowd. Clara smiled smug and victorious. White Dove didn't move, didn't speak. Only her fingers tightened briefly around the small eagle feather she wore at her throat. Then she released it. The feather drifted to the dust between them. Red Elk emerged from the edge of the crowd like a shadow made flesh. Tall, wide-shouldered, his arms folded, eyes cold and narrow as he stared daggers through Colt. Colt met the stare but didn't flinch. His jaw tightened. Somewhere deep down he knew what he had just done couldn't be undone. Sheriff McLean stood with arms crossed, beside the saloon doors, expression grim. He shook his head and lit a thin roll of tobacco with shaking fingers. "Boy just made a deal with the devil," he muttered to no one. The preacher stumbled through the vows. The ring slid onto Clara's finger as the sun slipped behind the ridge, casting the town in long, cruel shadows. When it was done, Colt didn't kiss Clara. He turned away from White Dove's motionless form and led his new bride past the stairs in silent condemnation. White Dove walked out of town alone, her silhouette growing smaller against the dying sun. Red Elk followed at a distance, a sentinel of fury. Back at Judge Voss's sprawling ranch house, Colt sat stiff-backed at the head of the long table set with fine china and crystal. Clara laughed loud and bright among the wealthy guests, flashing her new ring under the flickering lamplight. The laughter grated on Colt's nerves. He stared at his plate, untouched, listening instead to the distant night wind. It seemed to carry the faint sound of drums from somewhere out on the plains. Later that night, Colt stood alone on the porch, staring into the black void beyond the glow of the oil lamp. He thumbed the silver locket again but didn't open it. His hand clenched into a fist. The guilt crawled up his spine like a venomous snake. Behind him, Clara's voice floated from inside, playful and mocking. "You made the right choice, darling. You'll be the richest rancher west of the Mississippi. That Indian girl never belonged in this world." Colt didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the darkness. Somewhere out there, White Dove was gone. And some part of him, the part that mattered, had gone with her. The church bell tolled again in the distance. This time, it sounded like a warning. The locket slipped from his fingers and swung silently at his chest as he whispered into the cold, indifferent night. What have I done? The prairie winds had no answer.